That's true. Naked Palpatine.
Oh, you pick that one. Fresh out of the clone tank, nude Palpatine is my
Well, that's the first thing I think of when you say Dark Empire Palpatine.
I'm still currently dying. Maybe you didn't know that if you didn't see all my videos, but I've been sick for like 4 days. I'm feeling a little bit better, but there were at points where I was so dead that I literally couldn't read. When I had the capacity to do so, I did a lot of it. So I finished the first big relaunch novel of the Star Trek Enterprise series, which basically gives us a season 5 and 6 of Star Trek Enterprise, which we never got. The end of Star Trek Enterprise gave us the two-parter Terra Prime and Demons, or something like that, which gave us a very good story with a human-centric group. And before that, throughout the season, we were getting these little glimpses of the Romulans and seeming like we were heading toward, by either the next season or the final season, having the Romulan War, that is talked about in TOS, but we never actually get to see. But, of course, the show was canceled. We never got to see anything like that. And then we have These Are the Voyages, which is technically, story-wise, the Next Generation episode, more so than an Enterprise episode, where Riker is looking through old files to see this history of the Enterprise crew. And we get this very sudden, out of nowhere, death of Tucker and the rise of the Federation. But not a lot of people like that. The Good That Men Do, which is written by Andy Mangels and Michael A. Martin. Sorry about that. Hold on. Is basically, apologies about that, is basically a huge retcon. We learned some things. I don't think it's too much of a spoiler to say for this plot. It happens pretty early on. Actually happens in the very first page. We learn that Tucker did not actually die. So that's a big thing. We get more things with the Romulans that are going to be continued to be a factor moving forward. We have stuff with Shran going on. The actual whole story is presented to us in the 25th century, which is the furthest in the timeline we've ever been, unless we're counting Discovery with its last 3 seasons, which would be the furthest Trek has ever gone. But the early 25th century has an old Nog and an old Jake Sisko hanging out, as Nog has come across some files, because over the last couple of years, and I think it's very fitting because Section 31 played a big part in Discovery. It plays a big part, I'm sure, in a lot of the expanded media, but Section 31 came to exist initially from DS9. It is where it came into being. So the idea of having DS9 characters, unaltered stuff about the past is I think, the best way. I think it works very well in terms of that. And so we have stuff with Section 31. And their help in the crisis going on with the upcoming Romulan threat, which, again, there's no war yet. They averted war slightly. They prolonged it, basically. Everything is still coming to a head with that. It seems kind of inevitable that it has to happen. One, because we know that it happens, of course. But two, just because even if you didn't, let's say you never watched TOS, right? You had no idea. It's like the way everything's going, like, it has to happen. But Anyway, it's told really well. The biggest thing here is that it retcons Trip's death, and that's the biggest change here. Also, like stuff with Shran in the final episode, he was like trying to save like his daughter or something, but in this version, he doesn't even have a daughter at all. That was like entirely fabricated or just like messed with time or something. Like what you see in These Are the Voyages is not meant to be the actual reality. It is what history is written down, basically. Um, there's not too much to say spoiler without getting into spoilers, but I mean, Trip. I don't think it's too bad to say Trip ends up working for Section 31. I think that's. I don't think that's too big of a spoiler because that's pretty much like the huge point about all these relaunch novels. And I'll say initially, like you think Trip, like the engineer, like it's the equivalent of like having O'Brien work for or Scotty work for Section 31. Like, it just doesn't make sense initially. They make justifiable reasons for why they ask for his help, though, specifically. He's the one most championing that there is a threat of the Romans coming that everyone should prepare for, that no one else is taking as seriously as him and Archer are. There's the fact that in that previous Enterprise episode, he actually interacted with Romulan things and worked on them. So he actually has some understanding of the technology. Um, so it makes sense why they choose him. Now, again, Trip just doesn't feel like this sort of spy espionage person. However, at the same time, this is coming from a Star Wars Expanded Universe fan. I, you know, watched. I watched the films. I never thought that Han Solo could be a general, let alone a family man. Even by episode 6, sure, he's like good buddies with everyone, but like a dad? Like, that's a whole nother thing from just loving Leia, right? But this is called character development. Like, I don't think necessarily the espionage role fits for him right now, but I can certainly seeing him grow into that. Section 31 also isn't particularly treated that shady here, but at the same time, it's like we know that they are. We've seen DS9. If you're reading this series, you've watched the shows. Like, you just, most likely. If you don't, well, Section 31 is this kind of shady organization within Starfleet. But when it comes to a war being started, maybe Section 31 has their own motives, but at the end of the day, they do want to stop that war. It's not in their interests. So, I don't think it's like being like, oh, Section 31 is actually the good guys necessarily. It's just like right now, and maybe they are more altruistic in this. This would probably be early on into their life existence. I don't think you got to remember we skip a couple of generations. I mean, we evolved TOS. That's in one era, in the films, and then the next generation and Deep Space Nine and Voyager are all in a separate era. Those are all in like the 24th century. you know? So I don't think, that's a couple hundred years in between, you know? So definitely things can change within 100 years. So I don't think it's too much of a problem there. Also, something that I feel some people may get upset about, uh, because of the medium that we're in, because we are reading a novel instead of watching a show, we get POVs from T'Pol, where we get her perspective, right? But Romulans aren't Romulans. Vulcans aren't emotionless, right? They just hide their emotions. They suppress them. That's the whole Vulcan thing. They still feel things. So I mean, in a book medium, it makes sense to be able to know what she's feeling. So I if you don't read that often, but you're like, I want to see what happens after Enterprise season 4, that may take some adjusting to. But I don't think it's necessarily. It's not like she ever, when talking to someone in this book, just throws out how she's feeling left and right. That never happens. Whenever she's talking to someone in the story, it's always the same as it is in the TV show. But yeah, when you get inside her head, you get to know a little bit of what she's thinking, what she's feeling, and I think that's absolutely fine. It's just a difference of medium. Obviously, you don't have to. In the show, it's a lot more of interpreting how she's feeling because you can't be inside her head. But another thing I'll say is I think that everyone is done really well. Everybody feels like they did in the show to me. Um, Unfortunately, maybe this won't be true for all the books, but Reed, Travis, and Hoshi continue to be sidelined. But I mean, it's to be expected. I mean, the only show that did a really, 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 really good job of an ensemble cast was DS9. Maybe Voyager, but even TNG, like Worf, Riker, Data, Picard. Everyone else may get their moments, but they are not the priority. The priority of that series is those four. Um, and that's just kind of how it is. Everybody else is kind of just in the sidelines, and this is how it's always been. The TOS is Bones, it was Spock, and it was Kirk, and that was it. Everyone else was on the side, you know. Um, DS9 is the only one that tried to give equal time to literally everyone. But overall, as a start to a literary universe, to a literary continuation that is meant to continue the story after the events of the show, I think this does an expert job of, first off, retconning, which is, in my opinion, was a terrible move to kill off Trip how they did. Now, usually I'm not, that's a huge retcon to do, but at the same time, there's a precedence for it because it's not like we were actually watching that happen. We were watching Riker watching a simulation of this history that we were watching. So why couldn't that be falsified? Why couldn't that be wrong? That actually works amazingly well if you think about it. So I don't mind that retcon because of how they explained it. But anyway, I'm getting into some spoilers now. If you don't want that, time for you to go. But I highly, highly recommend this series. I think it's well worth your time. The next Star Trek book we'll be reading is Kobayashi Maru. Now there's another Star Trek book called The Kobayashi Maru. We'll talk about that one. Talking about the Kobayashi Maru book that is a continuation of the Enterprise relaunch. And that'll be next. And then after that, we have the duology of the Romulan War. But we'll get to that when we get to that. If you don't want spoilers, last chance. I'm gonna get into it. We let Jake in the 25th century as a successful author, which was nice to hear. We learn about this old scientist guy named Ephron, who is this Romulan scientist man. Right now, the big thing is that the Romulans are testing to make Warp 7. Which Warp 7, I'm not a huge Star Trek I don't know everything. But as far as I'm aware, I don't think that stuff exists until TNG. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that stuff, I don't think they can go Warp 7 until TNG. Or this is the first time they explicitly say Warp 7. So that would be a huge advantage to them, because I think the big thing that happened in the show, it's been a while since I watched the show of Enterprise, but the last big thing that they were like freaking out about was getting Warp 5 to work. So, and even that was barely. So it's something they want to stop. Right now, they're also trying to form the Coalition Compact, which is not like the whole Federation of Planets like it would eventually become. It's just five worlds: the Andorians, the Tellarites, the Vulcans. Where's the other one? The Caridians or something, and one other one I'm forgetting, but just 5. We also get a little bit of Romulan politics, which is always cool because they're very conniving and manipulating. We have Orion slavers attack Shran, which was cool. Because the Orion slavers are basically being like this third hand to do the Romulans' bidding. Because the Romulans have to do everything behind the scenes. Now, and again, with the whole messing with history and stuff, Nog makes the comparison to, well, Zephyr Cochrane, his history is not 100% accurate, right? Like, people talk about Zephyr in a certain way, and then you actually watch First Contact, and he's nothing like that. So, yeah, and then Trip meets Reed's contact, Harris, that we knew of from Section 31, and he ends up working for him. Trip must fake his death, therefore retconning that terrible finale from Star Trek Enterprise. Fong is this other Section 31 member that Trip meets up with, and I'm probably butchering that name. He's like an Asian guy. but they have this whole discussion about God, which I thought was, I don't know, it was very, very Star Trek. I enjoyed it. And there's also mention of the Mirrorverse, that the um, sorry about that. Anyway, there's mentions of the Mirrorverse, which is a bit weird. This is before even Kirk interacts with it. If we're counting Discovery, which would happen before Kirk, then we had the whole thing where they kept it quiet with that, but this still is happening before that. But Section 31 seems to know about it. Now, the reason Fong mentions it is because he says, like, well, if there's crazy things like that exist, like parallel worlds, why couldn't a god exist, maybe my god's real in this universe and not real in another, or my god's not real in this universe but is real in that one. Like, you just don't know. Like, anyway, it was interesting. But Section 31 does know about the mirror universe, which I think is, how do they know that? But, okay. It is also, interestingly enough, not common knowledge at this point in time that Romulans are actually related to Vulcans. Because Trip and Fong, they have contacts with these other aliens that are willing to genetically manipulate and kind of alter your face. Which, again, illegal, eugenics wars, but that's only on Earth, so they can kind of do whatever. But anyway, so they're made to look like whatever the Romulans are. They don't know, but when they look at each other, they say they look like, Vulcans, but they got a weird brain problem or something, because they got like these weird things in their face, you know. And that's when they realize, like, oh, so they must be in some way, shape, or form related to the Vulcans because they look like the Vulcans. So that was cool. Trip is made to look like Kuna here, who was Ephron's assistant. Archer's getting good at speeches. He has to give the speech to a bunch of people. He just totally owns it, and I just thought it was great. But it's something that I don't think he always was good at. It's something he's definitely been improving upon. Um, but yeah, so a lot of the book, one of the problems, let's say, of this book is just, and I know it's entirely subjective, but pacing. I just feel like this book is too long. I don't think it needed to be as long as it was. I feel like it could have been, a little bit of fluff could have been cut out, for sure. Just because it just like feels like it drags at points. But basically he's undercover with Fong for a bit. At some point, Fong gets murked, um, and Trip tries to convince Ephron to come work for him or work for the Coalition of Planets. But he ultimately says, like, I can't betray Romulus, but I also don't like what my military's doing, so I won't help them, make the drive. And then also Trip, like, because he's an engineer, he messes with their current prototype of it, which will set them back like probably a few months, maybe even a year at most, but like not completely stopping the matter at all. So, but that's basically like the core of the story. The other bits, like Archer trying to help Shran find his lover, basically, which they do. And I don't have too much to say about that. It feels like something you typically see in an episode. But those are basically like the two story points: is Trip on this mission for Section 31, Archer helping Shran, and pissing off his superiors in the middle of all that. That's basically the gist of the story. But by the end of it, Trip ends up sticking with Section 31, at least for the remainder of this Romulan crisis, until he knows for sure that the Romulans won't attack Earth. And at the end of when the voyage, these are the voyages when Archer goes to give his speech, and then Riker's like, oh, we know this ends because we've listened to this 1,000 times, and they leave or whatever. But while Archer's giving his speech, Trip goes to talk to T'Pol. So at least T'Pol gets to know that Trip is indeed alive, but he's going back into enemy territory to try to help, stop this whole Romulan threat. Where will that go? I don't know. We have one more book that I'm sure will include the Romulans, but the actual conflict is not going to happen until the duology of the Romulan Wars. And after that is, I think, a 5-book series on the rise of the Federation. But that's up next on my to-do list for Trek. But thank you all so much for watching. Look, I know that there's like 2 videos on this book because I looked it up. Not a lot of people talked about it. People have done reviews like online where they like type it, but as for videos on YouTube, there's surprising little talk about these books, which is very disappointing. But I promise you, even if I plan, by the time at least before I die, that I will have read every single Star Trek Litverse book that has ever existed. Now, however, I'm an impatient child. I want to get to the stuff that I'm super duper interested in, which is the stuff post Nemesis. So I'll be picking and choosing them here, but I'm definitely going to be doing all of the Enterprise stuff that takes place after the show. So we'll get through that, and we'll see where that all takes us from there. But it's going to be a long journey. It may even be longer than the Star Wars Expanded Universe. In fact, I can pretty much count on the fact that it is going to be longer than that. That's not even counting the Shatner books and all those other things, So there's a lot to get into here. But we're going to start off nice and easy with what I know and understand, which is the Enterprise books. So if that all sounds interesting to you, I hope you subscribe. If you're a fan of Trek, I will be talking about all these books, giving them some love because they deserve so much more. Because I love this book. I mean, again, like I said, the pacing's a bit off. I definitely think it could have been shorter, just because a lot of it kind of drags. Um, Other than that, I mean, I think this is phenomenal. I think it's great, and I'm so excited to see where the story goes from here. Until next time, guys, engage.